The Untamed Frontier of Montana Territory, 1878, a place where justice hangs by a thread and survival demands sacrifice. When Sheriff Robert Taylor's daughter vanishes at the hands of the most notorious cattle rustlers in the territory, her fate seems sealed. But in this land where blood feuds run deeper than rivers, an unlikely alliance forms. A Blackfoot warrior named Marquis, cast out from his people for questioning tribal traditions, becomes her only hope for survival. Two worlds collide in a desperate race against time across merciless terrain, where every choice carries the weight of life and death. This is a tale of courage that defies boundaries, proving that sometimes the most unlikely heroes emerge from the shadows of hatred. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The town of Rimrock Springs emerged from the rolling Montana plains like an afterthought, a collection of weathered buildings clinging to existence under the vast blue sky. A single dirt road cut through its center, connecting the general store, saloon, blacksmith, and the small, whitewashed church that served as the town's pride and moral compass. At the edge of town stood the sheriff's office, a sturdy log structure with iron bars on its windows and a worn American flag hanging limply. In the still summer air, inside, Sheriff Robert Taylor sat at his desk, running a weathered hand through his salt and pepper hair. The lines etched into his face told stories of 15 harsh years upholding the law in a place where justice often came at the barrel of a gun. His blue eyes, still sharp as a hawk's, scanned the telegram in his hands for the third time, his jaw tightening at its contents. "Another raid," he muttered, setting the paper down and reaching for his coffee. "Third ranch this month." His deputy, Charlie Finch, a gangly young man with earnest eyes and too little experience, shifted uncomfortably against the doorframe. "The Morrison place was hit badly, Sheriff. Took near 20 heads of prime beef cattle. Old man Morrison. Swears it was the Blackton gang again." Taylor nodded grimly. The Blackton gang had been terrorizing ranches across 3 territories, rustling cattle and leaving nothing but blood and ashes in their wake. What had started as small-time thievery had escalated into something far more deadly. 4 men died in the last year alone. "They're getting bolder," Taylor said, rising from his chair. "And closer to town." The door swung open, letting in a flood of golden afternoon light and the sound of approaching horses. Rebecca Taylor stepped inside, her brown hair tucked under a wide-brimmed hat, her riding skirt dusty from the trail. At 19, she had her mother's delicate features, but carried herself with a confidence that made the local boys both intimidated and smitten. "Pa," she said, removing her gloves. "Mrs. Peterson says the supply wagon is 3 days late. She's worried about her medicine." Sheriff Taylor sighed. "Likely delayed at Fort Benton. I'll send a wire." Rebecca nodded, reaching for the water dipper. "I saw riders out by Coyote Creek, 4 of them, heading north toward the Collins Ranch." Her eyes, the same piercing blue as her father's, flashed with concern. One of them had a bandana over his face. The sheriff and his deputy exchanged glances. "Becca," Taylor said, his voice adopting the tone that brooked no argument, "I want you staying close to town for the next few days." She set down the water dipper with more force than necessary. "Pa, I'm not a child. The Collins Ranch needs those medicines, and with the supply wagon delayed, it's not up for debate," Taylor cut in. "The Blackton gang doesn't take kindly to witnesses." He reached for his gun belt, strapping it around his waist. "Charlie and I will ride out to Collins' place. You stay with Martha at the general store until I get back." Rebecca's expression hardened, a look her father knew all too well. She had her mother's stubbornness, God rest her soul. 7 years since typhoid had taken Elizabeth Taylor, and still her daughter stood with the same tilt of the chin when challenged. "Fine," she conceded through her eyes. I'll help Martha with inventory." As Rebecca left, Sheriff Taylor turned to his deputy. "Saddle the horses. We leave in 10 minutes." Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty street. Rebecca walked briskly toward the general store, her mind already forming a plan. She would wait until her father was well on his way before retrieving her own horse from the livery. The Collins family had a sick child, and Mrs. Collins was expecting. They needed those medicines, and Rebecca knew the shortcut through Rattlesnake Ridge that would get her there faster than her father's more cautious route. Unknown to the sheriff and his daughter, other eyes watched the town of Rimrock Springs. From the cover of pine trees that dotted the surrounding hills, a solitary figure observed the movement of people through a brass spyglass. Marquis, his black hair tied back with a strip of leather, lowered the spyglass and frowned. The man's face was angular, marked with a single scar that ran from temple to jaw, evidence of a life lived on the edge of two worlds. Born to a Blackfoot mother and raised within the tribe until age 12, Marquis had been sent to one of the government schools to learn the white man's ways. He had returned 5 years later, fluent in English and forever changed, belonging fully to neither world. Now he lived in the spaces between, tracking game for ranchers who would pay him and avoiding the growing tensions between settlers and his mother's people. Lately, his tracking skills had been focused on a different kind of prey. The cattle rustlers had struck his employer's ranch twice, and the old rancher Samuel Harrison was one of the few men who treated Marquis with respect rather than suspicion. Harrison had promised him a parcel of land along the creek if he could help stop the thieves, land of his own, a dream Marquis had scarcely allowed himself to consider. The sun was beginning to set when Marquis spotted a lone rider emerging from town. Even at this distance, he recognized the sheriff's daughter, heading not toward the safety of any nearby ranch, but toward the high country where the rustlers were rumored to camp. He cursed under his breath, knowing the foolishness of such a journey. As twilight deepened, Rebecca Taylor urged her mare faster along the narrow trail that cut through Rattlesnake Ridge. The medicine bag bounced against her saddle, its contents carefully packed by the shopkeeper. She calculated she could reach the Collins ranch before dark, deliver the medicine, and be back in town before her father returned from his patrol. What she didn't see was the dust cloud rising behind her, nor did she hear the approaching riders. Until it was too late. 4 men on horseback appeared suddenly from a hidden ravine, cutting off her path forward and back. Rebecca reined her horse to a sudden stop, her heart hammering against her ribs as she recognized the leader, Silas Blackton. Himself, his bearded face twisted in a malicious grin. "Well now," Blackton drawled, tipping his hat with mock courtesy, "if it ain't the sheriff's daughter, all alone in these dangerous hills." His eyes, cold as winter frost, assessed her with calculated interest. "Boys, I believe our luck just changed. Seems we found some mighty valuable insurance." As the rustlers closed in around her, Rebecca reached for the small derringer hidden in her boot, but Blackton was faster. His hand shot out, gripping her wrist with bruising force. "That ain't polite, Miss Taylor," he said, twisting until she cried out and the small gun fell to the dirt. "Now, you're gonna come along nice and quiet-like. Your pa's been causing us no end of trouble, and I reckon having his precious daughter as our guest might convince him to turn a blind eye next time we pass through." From his hidden position among the rocks above, Marquis watched the encounter unfold with growing alarm. 1 against 4 were poor odds, but the alternatives were worse. He notched an arrow, drew his bowstring taut, and took careful aim. Chutters! First arrow struck with deadly precision, embedding itself in the shoulder of the rustler, reaching for Rebecca's reins. The man howled in pain, nearly falling from his horse. Before the others could react, a second arrow whistled through the air, piercing the hat of another rustler. Chaos erupted. Blackton fired wildly toward the rocks, while the wounded man struggled To control his panicking horse, Rebecca seized the moment, kicking her mare into motion, but Blackton was too quick. He spurred his horse forward, cutting off her escape and grabbing her forcefully by the arm. "You're not going anywhere," he snarled, dragging her from her saddle as his men returned fire toward their unseen attacker. "Boys, grab her! We're leaving! Now!" As the rustlers thundered away with Rebecca struggling in their grasp, Marquis slipped silently back to where his horse waited. The sun had almost disappeared beyond the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of blood red. The hunt had begun. Darkness fell across the Montana territory like a heavy blanket, bringing with it a silence broken only by the pounding of hooves against hard-packed earth. Silas Blackton led his gang deeper into the wilderness, pushing their horses to a punishing pace. Rebecca, bound and thrown across Blackton's saddle like cargo, struggled to breathe with each jarring stride. The medicine bag she'd been carrying was gone, lost somewhere on the trail during the ambush. "Faster!" Blackton barked at his men. "That Indian'll track us if we don't make the canyon by midnight." The wounded rustler, a man with a pockmarked face named Jasper, groaned as he clutched his shoulder. "I need the arrow out, Silas. I'm bleeding bad." "You'll live," Blackton said without sympathy, "or you won't. Either way, we ain't stopping till we're clear." The terrain grew steeper, forcing the horses to slow their pace. Rebecca used the opportunity to take stock of her surroundings, memorizing landmarks despite the darkness. The North Star glimmered overhead. They were heading west, deeper into the mountain range that locals called the Widow's Teeth for the jagged peaks that resembled fangs against the sky. Meanwhile, Sheriff Taylor and Deputy Finch arrived at the Collins Ranch to find the family unharmed but frightened by recent visits from strangers asking about their cattle. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "They weren't typical rustlers," Mr. Collins explained, standing on his porch with a shotgun cradled in his arms. "Too well-dressed. Asked a lot of questions about who owns what around here." Taylor frowned. "Sounds like they're planning something bigger than just stealing a few heads of cattle." As they prepared to leave, Mrs. Collins appeared at the door, her expression concerned. "Sheriff, did Rebecca bring our medicine? The baby's cough is worse." Taylor felt his blood run cold. "Rebecca's in town, ma'am. She hasn't been by?" The couple exchanged worried glances. "We thought she always brings our supplies when the wagon's late." Without another word, Taylor mounted his horse, fear clawing at his throat. "Charlie, ride back to town. Check if she's there. I'll follow the ridge trail. It's the shortcut she'd have taken." As they galloped in opposite directions, the first drops of rain began to fall from the gathering clouds, washing away tracks and dimming hope with each passing minute. Back in the mountains, the Blackton gang had reached a narrow canyon where limestone walls towered on either side, creating a natural fortress. They made camp in a large cave halfway up the eastern wall, accessible only by a treacherous switchback trail. Inside, the remnants of previous stays were evident. A stone fire, ring, stacked firewood, and crude sleeping pallets. 2 more men waited at the camp, the rest of Blackton's gang. They jumped to their feet as the riders approached, hands on their weapons until they recognized their leader. "You're late," said a tall man with a silver star pinned mockingly to his vest, a trophy taken from a marshal he'd killed the previous year. His eyes narrowed when he spotted Rebecca. "What the hell, Silas? You brought a woman." Blackton dismounted, dragging Rebecca roughly to her feet. "Not just any woman, Quinn. Meet Miss Rebecca Taylor, daughter of the illustrious sheriff of Brimrock Springs." Quinn's expression shifted from annoyance to calculating interest. "Insurance? Smart man." Blackton grinned, shoving Rebecca toward the cave. "And bait." Inside the cave, they bound Rebecca to a support post, her hands tied behind her back. The Wounded man Jasper collapsed nearby, his face pale and sweating as another rustler worked to remove the arrow from his shoulder. His screams echoed through the canyon when they finally yanked it free. Rebecca watched in horrified fascination as blood poured from the wound. "He needs a doctor," she said, addressing no one in particular. "That needs to be cleaned and stitched." "Properly." Blackton crouched before her, his breath hot on her face. "Are you offering your services, Miss Taylor?" She met his gaze steadily. "I assist our town doctor sometimes. I can help him if you untie me." A slow, dangerous smile spread across Blackton's face. "Pretty and useful. Ain't that something?" He gestured to one of his men. "Cut her hands free, but keep a gun on her. She tries anything, shoot her in the voot." With her hands unbound, Rebecca moved carefully to the wounded man's side. Someone brought her a canteen of water and a filthy shirt to use as bandages. She worked methodically, cleaning the wound as best she could with the limited supplies. "Why are you doing this?" she asked Blackton quietly as she worked. "Rustling cattle is one thing, but kidnapping? Murder? The army will hunt you down for this." Blackton laughed, the sound echoing off the stone walls. "You think this is about cattle? Sweetheart, cattle are just the beginning." Quinn stepped forward, shooting Blackton a warning look. "Shut your mouth, Silas." But Blackton was enjoying Rebecca's attention too much to stop. "See, there's a railroad coming through, and certain parcels of land are about to become very valuable. Land that belongs to simple folk who might be persuaded to sell cheap if they're suffering from, say, mysterious cattle losses or tragic accidents." Rebecca's hands still. "You're working for someone. Smart girl," Blackton said, ignoring Quinn's glare. "Let's just say there are powerful men in Helena who don't like waiting for progress. Men who pay well for results." As the night wore on, the storm intensified. Rain lashed against the canyon walls, turning the dusty ground into slick mud. Sheriff Taylor followed his daughter's trail as far as Rattlesnake Ridge before the rain washed away all signs of her passage. Soaked to the skin and increasingly desperate, he found her derringer lying in the mud, proof of his worst fears. He was examining the ground for any remaining tracks when a shadow materialized from the darkness. Taylor drew his revolver with lightning speed, aiming at the figure approaching through the rain. "That's far enough," he commanded. The figure stopped, raising empty hands. "Sheriff Taylor," a deep voice called over the storm. "I know where they've taken your daughter." Taylor squinted through the downpour. "Step closer, slow." The man advanced, and Taylor recognized him, the Blackfoot tracker who sometimes worked for the ranches north of town. "Marquis," he said, lowering his gun slightly, "what do you know about my daughter?" "I saw the abduction," Marquis replied, rainwater streaming down his scarred face. "Blackton and his men took her west toward Widow's Teeth. They're holed up in Dead Wolf Canyon." Taylor's grip tightened on his weapon. "Why should I trust you?" "Because I put an arrow in one of them trying to stop it," Marquis answered simply. "And because I know that canyon better than anyone alive. You'll never find it without me, especially in this storm." The sheriff hesitated only briefly. "If you're lying—" "I'm not," Marquis interrupted, "but we must hurry. Blackton didn't take her for ransom. Something else is happening." Miles away in the canyon, Rebecca finished bandaging Jasper's shoulder. She'd managed to stop the bleeding, but infection was already setting in. Without proper medicine, his chances were poor. "Thank you," Jasper whispered when she gave him water. "I got a wife in Butte. A little boy." "Shut up, Jasper," Quinn snapped from across the cave. Rebecca used the momentary distraction to scan the cave, counting men and weapons, noting the single entrance. 7 men total, all armed. The odds were impossible. Blackton grabbed her arm, pulling her away from Jasper. "Your nursing duties are done." He retied her hands, this time in front, but left her legs free. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a big day for you." "What happens tomorrow?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Blackton's grin sent ice through her veins. Tomorrow your daddy gets a message, a piece of his precious daughter, maybe an ear or a finger, just enough to convince him to look the other way while we finish our business. Outside, the storm raged on, thunder cracking like gunshots against the canyon walls. As lightning briefly illuminated the landscape, a solitary figure watched the cave entrance from the shadows of a juniper grove across the canyon. Maki had left the sheriff to gather reinforcements while he went ahead to scout. The Blackfoot tracker's eyes narrowed as he counted the guards, 2 men at the cave entrance, taking shelter under an overhanging rock. The storm would provide cover, but scaling those wet rocks would be treacherous. He settled in to wait, a plan already forming in his mind. Dawn was still hours away, but when it came, blood would follow. The storm subsided just before dawn, leaving behind a world transformed. Muddy rivulets cascaded down the canyon walls, and the air hung heavy with the scent of wet sage and pine. Inside the cave, Rebecca awoke with a jolt as rough hands shook her shoulder. "Up!" ordered Quinn, his face grim in the fading firelight. "We're moving!" Rebecca's muscles screamed in protest as she was pulled to her feet. She had spent the night huddled against the cold stone, sleep coming in fitful bursts between planning, escape routes that never materialized. "What about Jasper?" she asked, nodding toward the wounded man who lay still, his breathing shallow and labored. Quinn's expression hardened. "Jasper ain't coming." A chill ran through her that had nothing to do with the morning air. She watched as Blackton crouched beside the dying man, speaking too quietly for her to hear. Jasper's eyes widened momentarily before Blackton pressed a pillow over his face. His legs kicked once, twice, then stilled. "No!" Rebecca lunged forward, but was yanked back by Quinn's iron grip. "That's mercy," Quinn hissed in her ear. "Infection would have taken him slow. Be grateful we ain't as cruel as you think." Outside the cave, the remaining men had already packed the horses. Rebecca was ushered down the treacherous switchback path, her bound hands making balance nearly impossible on the slick rocks. One misstep would send her plummeting to the canyon floor. "Where are we going?" she demanded as Blackton roughly hoisted her onto his horse. He smiled, tying her wrists to the saddle horn. "Higher country. Your daddy's too good a tracker to stay put." He swung up behind her, his arms snaking around her waist. "Besides, we've got a schedule to keep." The gang set off in a tight formation, winding through the narrow canyon floor before ascending a game trail so steep that the horses strained with every step. Rebecca memorized each turn, each landmark, the split rock shaped like a bear's head, the 3 lightning-struck pines, the creek that flowed red with mineral deposits. If she escaped, this knowledge might save her life. Unknown to the Rustlers, Maki watched their departure from a high perch, noting their direction before slipping away to rendezvous with Sheriff Taylor. He moved like a shadow across the rugged terrain, reading signs invisible to untrained eyes. A displaced stone, bent grass, the subtle traces of 7 horses and 6 men. At the canyon's entrance, he found Taylor waiting with Deputy Finch and 3 grim-faced ranchers, all heavily armed. "They've moved out," Maki reported, crouching to examine fresh tracks, heading northwest toward the high meadows. 6 men, 7 horses. Taylor's face paled. 6? There were 7. Maki nodded slowly. One did not leave the cave alive. The sheriff's hand tightened around his rifle. "Rebecca?" "No," Maki said firmly. "A man. Your daughter rides with Blackton. She lives." One of the ranchers, a burly man named Davis, spat into the dirt. "How do we know the Injun ain't leading us into a trap? Blackfeet has been stealing cattle too." Maki's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "Enough." "Davis," Taylor said sharply, "Maki's the best tracker in the territory, and he's never given me reason to doubt him." He turned to the Blackfoot. "Lead on." By midday, the Blackton gang had reached a high alpine meadow ringed by dense pine forest. A crude log cabin stood at its center, smoke curling from its stone chimney. Two men emerged at their approach, rifles ready until they recognized Blackton. "You're late," called one, a balding man with a drooping mustache. "Mr. Montgomery's man is already inside. He ain't happy." Blackton cursed under his breath, dismounting and pulling Rebecca down after him. "Keep your mouth shut if you want to live through this," he warned, cutting the rope that bound her to the saddle, but leaving her hands tied. Inside the cabin, a well-dressed man in an expensive suit stood warming his hands by the fire. His trimmed beard and gold watch chain marked him as someone accustomed to luxuries rarely seen in these mountains. "Mr. Blackton," he said without turning, his accent revealing Eastern education. "Your telegram said you'd complete the Collins and Peterson acquisitions by now. My employer is disappointed." "Got complicated," Blackton replied, pushing Rebecca forward. "Sheriff Taylor's been snooping around, so we acquired some leverage instead." The man turned, his cold eyes appraising Rebecca like merchandise. The sheriff's daughter, crude but potentially effective. He straightened his cuffs. "Nevertheless, Mr. Montgomery expects results. The railroad survey team arrives in 3 weeks. All properties in question must be secured by then." "They will be," Blackton assured him. "Taylor will back off once he gets a piece of his girl in. The mail. The rest will sell when their cattle mysteriously disappear or their homes burn down." Rebecca listened in horror as they casually discussed destroying her community's lives. "You won't get away with this," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "People won't sell just because—" The well-dressed man struck her across the face, the force of the blow sending her stumbling back. "People will do exactly as they're told when properly motivated, Miss Taylor, your father included." Blood trickled from her split lip as she glared at him. "You don't know my father." "Feisty," the man remarked to Blackton. "Ensure she remains alive until the properties are secured. Then dispose of her somewhere her father will never find her." He reached for his hat and gloves. "I'll inform Mr. Montgomery of the adjustment to our timeline." After he departed, Blackton shoved Rebecca into a small back room barely large enough for a cot and a chamber pot. "Get comfortable," he said, closing the door. "You'll be here a while." Through the thin walls, she heard him instructing his men. 2 would ride to Rimrock Springs with a message for her father. The others would stay to guard her while Blackton continued with their operation. Rebecca sank onto the cot, the full weight of her situation crashing down. This wasn't just about cattle rustling or even a simple kidnapping. Men like Montgomery were stealing land for the coming railroad, using Blackton's gang as their enforcers. People would lose everything, their homes, livelihoods, perhaps even their lives. She examined her surroundings, searching for anything that might serve as a weapon or tool. The window was small but unbarred. The floorboards are old and possibly loose. The walls are solid log but with chinking that might be worked free. Her hands twisted against the ropes, seeking weakness. Meanwhile, Sheriff Taylor's posse followed, making through increasingly difficult terrain. The tracker moved with unerring precision, reading signs invisible to the others. A broken twig, a horseshoe print in a patch of mud, a tuft of horsehair caught on a branch. "How much further?" Taylor asked as they paused to rest the horses. "We're gaining," Maki replied, studying the sky. "But nightfall comes soon. In darkness we risk losing their trail or riding into ambush." Deputy Finch, his young face streaked with dirt and worry, shifted nervously in his saddle. "Sheriff, if they hurt Rebecca—" "They won't," Taylor said firmly, though his eyes betrayed his fear. "She's no use to them harmed." Davis, the distrustful rancher, had been watching Maki closely throughout the day. Now he urged his horse closer to the tracker. "You ain't doing this out of the goodness of your heart, Blackfoot. What's your game?" Maki continued checking, his horse's hooves seemingly unperturbed by the accusation. "No game. Your people took my land. I take what work I can find." "There's more," Taylor said quietly, recognizing something in the tracker's demeanor. You know something about Blackton. You're not saying. A shadow passed over Maki's scarred face. Blackton and his men raided a Blackfoot hunting camp last winter, killed 3, including my cousin. His voice remained even, betraying no emotion. They will answer for this blood. The revelation hung in the air between them. The truth of Maki's involvement finally became clear. This wasn't just a job for him, it was vengeance. As dusk approached, the posse made camp in a sheltered gully, keeping their fire small and voices lower. In the growing darkness, Maki slipped away, moving silently toward the high meadow to scout ahead. What he discovered would change everything. Night fell over the high meadow, transforming the alpine landscape into a realm of deep shadows and silver moonlight. Maki crouched motionless among the pines, observing the cabin where Rebecca was held. 2 guards patrolled outside, while occasional movements behind lit windows revealed at least 3 more men inside. The operation was larger than he had anticipated. From his hidden vantage point, Maki watched as a wagon arrived shortly before midnight. 2 men unloaded wooden crates, carrying them inside with careful precision, weapons perhaps, or explosives, tools of destruction meant for the homesteads that stood in Montgomery's way. Retreating silently, Maki returned to the posse's camp and found Taylor still awake, staring into the dying embers of their small fire. "Well?" the sheriff asked, tension evident in every line of his body. "The cabin is heavily guarded," Maki reported. "Your daughter is alive, kept in a back room. But there is more happening. A wagon brought supplies, crates that the men handled like they contained blasting powder." Taylor's expression darkened. "Blasting powder? What the hell are they planning?" A message arrived as well. 2 riders departed heading east, toward Rimrock Springs. The sheriff stood abruptly. "We need to move now." Maki shook his head. "Attack now and your daughter dies first. The odds are poor, 7 men against our 6, with them holding defensible positions." "Then what do you suggest?" Taylor demanded, frustration bleeding into his voice. "I go alone," Maki said simply. "I can get closer than a group, perhaps create an opportunity to speak with your daughter." Deputy Finch, who had been pretending to sleep nearby, sat up. "It's suicide." "It is necessary," Maki countered. "You follow at dawn, but stay hidden. Wait for my signal." Taylor studied the Blackfoot tracker, searching his face for deception, but finding only determination. Finally, he nodded. "Do what you can. But understand this. If anything happens to my daughter, there won't be a place on earth where you can hide from me." Maki accepted the threat with a slight inclination of his head before disappearing into the darkness. Inside her makeshift prison, Rebecca worked a loose nail from the ancient bed frame, using it to slowly wear away at her bindings. Hours passed as she rubbed the rope against the nail's head, her wrists raw and bleeding from the effort. Just as the first thread snapped, the door swung open. Quinn entered, carrying a tin plate of beans and a cup of water. "Dinner," he announced, flatly, setting the items on the floor. Rebecca quickly hid the nail beneath her leg, keeping her hands in front where he could see them, still apparently bound. She watched him warily, noting the way his gaze lingered on her face, where bruising had formed from the businessman's strike. "He shouldn't have hit you," Quinn said unexpectedly. "That wasn't part of the plan." Rebecca saw an opportunity. "What is the plan, Quinn? Kill innocent farmers for railroad money?" His expression hardened. "Ain't nobody innocent. Those farmers are sitting on land that's worth 20 times what they paid for it." "So that justifies murder." Quinn's hand moved to his gun. "Careful, girl. I said he shouldn't have hit you. Didn't say I wouldn't." Rebecca changed tactics. "What's your cut of Montgomery's money? Enough to retire somewhere nice, or just enough to keep you doing his dirty work?" Something flickered in Quinn's eyes. Doubt, perhaps, or wounded pride. "I get what's owed me." "You Get whatever scraps Blackton leaves you, she pressed, while men like Montgomery get rich. Quinn stepped closer, looming over her. You think you're smarter than me. Your daddy's badge won't protect you out here. My father will come for me, Rebecca said with quiet certainty, and when he does, Montgomery will disappear back east, leaving you to hang. The rustler's eyes narrowed dangerously. He reached down suddenly, grabbing her bound hands. Rebecca's heart raced, certain he'd discovered her partially cut ropes. Instead, he produced a knife. You don't need these anymore, he said, slicing through her bindings. Not where you'll be sleeping tonight. Fear flooded her veins as Quinn hauled her to her feet. He dragged her from the small room into the main cabin, where Blackton and 3 other men sat playing cards. A half-empty whiskey bottle stood at the center of the table. What's this? Blackton demanded, eyeing Quinn suspiciously. She's trying to turn us against each other, Quinn said, shoving Rebecca forward. Talking about Montgomery and hanging. Blackton rose slowly, his movement deliberate as a rattlesnake preparing to strike. That's so! Rebecca stood her ground despite the terror building inside her. They'll hunt all of you down for what you're doing. Not just my father, the army, once they learn about the railroad scheme. The cabin fell silent as the men exchanged uneasy glances. Finally, Blackton laughed, though the sound held no humor. Boys, it seems the sheriff's daughter thinks we're just common criminals. He circled Rebecca slowly. Tell me, Miss Taylor, what would you call men who kill for money? Dead men, she replied, lifting her chin defiantly. When justice catches up to you. Blackton's hand shot out, grabbing her throat. Justice! He snarled, his face inches from hers. There's no justice in this territory, only power, and those smart enough to take it. Rebecca clawed at his hand, struggling for breath as spots danced before her eyes. Just as darkness began to close in, he released her. She collapsed to her, knees gasping. Take her to the cellar, Blackton ordered. Chain her to the wall. Tomorrow we will send her father a finger as a reminder of who holds the power here. Outside in the darkness, Maki had worked his way closer to the cabin, slipping past the guards with the stealth of a lifetime spent hunting. Now he crouched beneath the window, listening to Rebecca's confrontation with the rustlers. His hand tightened around his knife when he heard Blackton's threat. He watched as Quinn and another man dragged Rebecca across the room to a trapdoor in the floor. They descended with her into darkness, returning minutes later without her. She's secure, Quinn reported, though she fought like a wildcat. Blackton nodded, returning to his cards. 2 of you sleep. The rest keep watch. Montgomery's man will be back tomorrow, and I want good news for him. Mackay retreated silently into the forest to consider his options. The cellar complicated matters. A direct assault would likely get Rebecca killed before they could reach her. He needed another approach. An hour before dawn, as mist rose from the damp earth to shroud the meadow, Maki made his move. One guard had dozed off at his post, while the other paced restlessly, stamping his feet against the cold. Neither noticed the shadow that slipped behind the cabin and pried open the small exterior doors that led to the cellar. Rebecca huddled against the damp stone wall, one ankle shackled to an iron ring. The cellar smelled of earth and mold, the only light coming from thin cracks between the floorboards above. She'd almost freed herself from the rope bindings earlier. Now the situation was far worse. The iron shackle was secured with a padlock, the key undoubtedly with Blackton. A scraping sound drew her attention to the outside cellar doors. Her muscles tensed, ready to fight despite the hopelessness of her situation. The doors opened slowly, and a figure silhouetted against the fading night sky slipped inside. Miss Taylor, a deep voice whispered. Do not be afraid. Rebecca squinted through the darkness. Who's there? The figure moved closer, and she recognized the Blackfoot tracker, who sometimes came to town. Maki! He crouched beside her, examining the shackle. Your father is nearby with men, but attacking now would be dangerous for you. Hope surged within her. They're planning something terrible. They have blasting powder. They're going to force people off their land for the railroad. Maki nodded grimly, working at the lock with a slender piece of metal. I heard. 2 men have already ridden toward town. We have to warn them, Rebecca urged. First, we get you free. The lock clicked open and the shackle fell away. Can you walk? She rubbed her ankle, wincing. Yes. What's your plan? Maki's scarred face revealed nothing. We cannot leave undetected, so we must force them to move you. How? Fire, he said simply, producing a small bundle from his pouch. When the moment comes, run for the trees to the east. Your father waits there. Before Rebecca could respond, voices sounded above. Mackay pressed something cold and metal into her palm, a small knife. Courage, he whispered, then slipped back toward the cellar doors, and was gone. Dawn broke over the mountain, bringing with it a reckoning long overdue. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the cracks in the cellar, illuminating Rebecca's prison with thin golden beams. She sat with her back against the wall, the shackle loosely reattached around her ankle, enough to appear secured if someone checked, but loose enough that she could slip free at a moment's notice. The small knife Maki had given her was tucked into her boot, its presence a reassuring weight against her skin. Footsteps creaked on the floorboards above, accompanied by the smell of coffee and bacon. Rebecca's stomach growled involuntarily. She hadn't eaten since the meager beans Quinn had brought the night before. She closed her eyes, straining to hear the conversation overhead. 2 days at most, Blackton was saying. Once we've made our point with the Taylor girl, we move on the Collins place first. Another voice responded, one of the men she hadn't seen before. That marshal's still sniffing around Helena. What if he connects Montgomery to this? That's Montgomery's problem, Blackton replied. Our job is making sure these farmers understand the consequences of refusing to sell. A trapdoor in the ceiling opened, flooding the cellar with light. Quinn descended the crude ladder, carrying a tin plate and cup. His eyes narrowed when he saw her, searching for any sign of tampering with the shackle. Breakfast, he said curtly, setting the items just within her reach. Blackton says to keep your strength up. Says he needs you looking healthy enough when he takes your portrait. For your daddy. Rebecca ignored the food. Portrait? Quinn's mouth twisted into a humorless smile. Figure of speech. He's sending your pa a piece of you, remember. I want to make sure you look alive in the picture. She suppressed a shudder, reaching for the cup instead. The water was cool and clean. They still needed her alive, at least for now. When? She asked, working to keep her voice steady. Noon. Montgomery's man is bringing a camera. Quinn started toward the ladder, then paused. Remember what I said. Don't make it worse for yourself. Once he had gone, Rebecca examined her surroundings more carefully in the improved light. The cellar was roughly 15 feet square, with stone walls and dirt floor. Shelves along one. All held dusty preserves and bottles. This had once been some family's root cellar. The outside doors Maki had used were barred now from the outside, but the wood looked weathered and weak. She ate quickly, knowing she would need her strength. Then she moved around the cellar, testing the walls, the shelves, searching for anything useful. Behind a stack of empty crates, she found a rusted horseshoe. Not much of a weapon, but better than nothing. She concealed it in the folds of her skirt alongside Maki's knife. Outside the cabin, Sheriff Taylor and his posse had taken positions in the dense forest surrounding the meadow. Through his field glasses, Taylor watched the comings and goings of Blackton's men with mounting frustration. We should move now, Davis urged, his finger twitching near his rifle's trigger. We've got them outnumbered. Deputy Finch shook his head. Rebecca's in that cellar. We can't risk it. Maki said to wait for his signal, Taylor reminded them, though every fiber of his being screamed to charge in and save his daughter. We'll give him until noon. A horseman approached the cabin from the east, a well-dressed man carrying a large wooden box. Taylor recognized the expensive suit and bearing of Montgomery's representative. What's he carrying? Finch asked, squinting. Taylor's Jaw tightened. Looks like a camera. Miles away in Rimrock Springs, chaos had erupted. Two of Blackton's men had ridden into town at dawn, delivering a blood-stained envelope to Martha's General Store. Inside was a lock of Rebecca's hair and a note demanding Sheriff Taylor abandon his pursuit of the Blackton gang. To emphasize their point, they had shot the blacksmith when he tried to stop them, leaving him bleeding on the boardwalk before galloping out of town. Word spread quickly. Farmers and townspeople gathered, forming a militia determined to rescue their sheriff's daughter. They were led by a rancher named Garrett, who had served in the army during the war. By mid-morning, 12 armed men were riding hard toward the mountains, following the Rustlers' trail. Back at the cabin, the atmosphere had grown tense. Montgomery's man inspected the blasting powder, writing notes in a small leather book. Blackton paced impatiently, pausing occasionally to stare out the window at the surrounding forest. "Something's not right," he muttered to Quinn. "Send 2 men to check the perimeter again." Quinn nodded, gesturing to the youngest rustlers. "Ben, Mike, make a sweep, and keep your eyes open." As the men departed, Blackton turned to Montgomery's representative. "How much longer with those calculations?" The man didn't look up from his notebook. "Precision requires time, Mr. Blackton, unless you'd prefer to blow yourself up along with the Collins farmhouse." Blackton cursed under his breath. "Just hurry it up. I want to be done with this business by nightfall." In the cellar, Rebecca had positioned herself directly beneath the trapdoor, the horseshoe clutched in her hand. When the door opened, she would have one chance to strike before they realized. The shackle was loose. She rehearsed the move in her mind. Swing hard, climb fast, run for the east woods. Suddenly, shouts erupted above, followed by the pounding of boots across the floorboards. "Fire! The barn's on fire!" Rebecca's heart leaped. Maki's signal. She tensed, ready to move, but the trapdoor remained closed as the men rushed outside to battle the blaze. Through the cracks in the floorboards, she could see shadows moving frantically and heard Blackton bellowing orders. The distraction had worked, but she remained trapped below. The outside cellar doors were her only option now. She slipped free of the shackle and moved quickly to the doors, pushing against them. They didn't budge. The bar holding them shut was too strong. Just as despair threatened to overwhelm her, a soft scraping sound came from the other side. The bar was being lifted. The doors opened a crack, and Maki's face appeared in the sliver of light. "Quickly," he whispered, extending his hand. Rebecca grasped it, and he pulled her out into the blinding daylight. Smoke billowed from the small barn 50 yards away, drawing the attention of all Blackton's men. Staying low, Maki led her along the cabin's shadow toward the tree line. They had almost reached the safety of the forest when a shout rang out behind them. "The girl! She's escaping!" A gunshot cracked, splintering bark from a tree inches from Rebecca's head. Maki pushed her forward. "Run! Do not stop!" She sprinted into the trees, pine branches whipping at her face. More shots followed, bullets thudding into trunks around her. She risked a glance back and saw Maki had stopped. Bow in hand, covering her retreat, an arrow flew, striking one of the pursuing rustlers in the thigh. The man went down with a scream that echoed through the forest. Maki loosed another arrow before turning to run, but he wasn't fast enough. A bullet caught him in the side, the impact spinning him half around. Rebecca froze, watching in horror, as the Blackfoot staggered but remained standing. Blood darkened his shirt, yet he notched another arrow and fired, buying precious seconds. "Go!" he shouted to her, his voice strained with pain. Instead, she ran to him, ducking under his arm to support his weight. "Not without you." Together they stumbled deeper into the forest, the shouts of their pursuers growing closer with each labored breath. Maki guided them toward a steep ravine, each step leaving a trail of blood behind them. "Your father," he gasped, pointing to a rocky outcropping ahead. There, as if summoned by his words, Sheriff Taylor appeared on the ridge above them, rifle raised. Behind him, Deputy Finch and the ranchers spread out along the rocks, weapons trained on the forest. Below, "Rebecca, Taylor's voice carried across the ravine, a mixture of relief and fury. Blackton and his men burst from the trees, skidding to a halt when they saw the armed posse above. For a heartbeat, the scene froze. Rebecca and the wounded. Mackie caught between the rustlers and the lawmen, trapped on the edge of the steep drop. Then Blackton smiled, raising his pistol to aim directly at Rebecca's heart. "Throw down your weapons, Sheriff," he called, "or say goodbye to your daughter." The standoff had begun. Time seemed to stretch as Blackton's pistol remained trained on Rebecca's heart. The forest fell silent. No birdsong, no rustling leaves. Only the labored breathing of the wounded Blackfoot beside her. Blood seeped between Mackie's fingers where he clutched his side, his face a mask of pain and determination. Sheriff Taylor stood motionless on the ridge, his rifle half lowered, eyes locked with his daughter's across the ravine. Beside him, Deputy Finch's young face had gone pale, while Davis and the other ranchers kept their weapons aimed at Blackton's men, fingers tense on triggers. "I won't ask again, Sheriff," Blackton called, cocking his pistol with a menacing click. "Drop your weapons, all of you." Taylor's gaze shifted to Rebecca, a silent question in his eyes. She gave an almost imperceptible shake of her head. She knew what would happen if the lawmen surrendered. No one would leave these mountains alive. 5 seconds, Blackton continued. 5, 4. Mackie's weight shifted against Rebecca's shoulder. His hand moved to the knife at his belt. 3, 2... "Wait!" Sheriff Taylor shouted, raising his empty hand. "Let's talk, Blackton. Nobody needs to die here." Blackton laughed, a harsh sound that echoed across the ravine. "Bit late for that, ain't it? Your Indian friend already killed 2 of my men. And you've killed more," Taylor countered. "The blacksmith in town, Jasper in the cave. How many others for Montgomery's railroad money?" A flicker of surprise crossed Blackton's face. "You know about Montgomery?" "We know everything," Taylor bluffed. "The army's been informed, so has the territorial governor. It's over, Blackton." Quinn stepped forward, his expression troubled. "Silas, maybe we should—" "Shut up," Blackton snarled, never taking his eyes off Rebecca. "He's lying. There's no army. We still have the upper hand." In that moment of distraction, Mackie moved with startling speed for a wounded man. His knife flashed, slicing through the air toward Blackton. The blade struck the rustler's arm, causing his shot to go wild as he howled in pain and rage. "Run!" Mackie shouted, shoving Rebecca toward a narrow deer trail that descended into the ravine. Chaos erupted. Gunfire exploded from the ridge as Taylor and his men opened fire, forcing Blackton's gang to scatter for cover. Rebecca stumbled down the steep path, rocks and dirt sliding beneath her boots. Behind her, Mackie followed, one hand still pressed to his bleeding side. Bullets whined overhead, splintering tree trunks and kicking up dirt. Through the cacophony, Rebecca heard her father shouting orders, directing his men to provide covering fire. She glanced back to see Mackie slowing, his face ashen. "Keep going," he gasped, gesturing downstream. "Your father will find you." "Not without you," she insisted, returning to help him. The slope was treacherous, the path barely visible among the tumbled rocks and tangled roots. One misstep would send them plummeting to the canyon floor 30 feet below. Together they half ran, half slid down to the stream that cut through the ravine bottom. The water ran swift and cold, fed by mountain snowmelt. Rebecca helped Mackie across, the icy current numbing her legs to the knees. "There!" a voice shouted from above. Quinn and another rustler had circled around and now stood on the ridge directly. Overhead, a shot rang out, the bullet striking water inches from Rebecca's foot. She pulled Mackie toward a jumble of massive boulders that offered shelter against the gunfire. Behind the largest rock, she helped him sit, his breathing ragged and shallow. "Let me see," she demanded, gently pulling his hand away from the wound. Blood pulsed steadily from a hole just below his ribs. "You need a doctor." Mackie shook his head. "No time." He pressed something into her hand, a leather pouch. Medicine. Stops bleeding. Rebecca opened it to find dried herbs and a dark, resinous substance. Following his whispered instructions, she packed the mixture against the wound, then bound it tightly with strips torn from her petticoat. All the while, bullets continued to strike the rocks around them, showering them with stone fragments. "They're trying to pin us down until Blackton can flank us," Marquis said, his voice stronger now that the bleeding had slowed. Rebecca peered around the boulder. The ravine stretched east and west, its steep walls offering few escape routes. To the west, the sound of gunfire indicated her father and his posse were engaged with some of Blackton's men. To the east, the ravine narrowed into a tight canyon that might offer cover or become a deadly trap. "We need to move," she decided. "Can you walk?" Marquis nodded grimly, using his bow as a makeshift crutch to push himself upright. "I know these mountains. There is a place, a sacred cave. We can reach it through the canyon." They waited for a pause in the shooting, then darted from behind the boulders, splashing through the shallow stream toward the canyon entrance. Behind them, Quinn shouted in frustration, his bullets kicking up spray from the water but missing. His targets, the canyon walls, rose around them, cutting off the midday sun and plunging them into cool shadow. The path narrowed until they were forced to wade through knee-deep water, the current growing stronger with each step. Rebecca supported Marquis as best she could, his arm draped over her shoulders, his weight increasingly heavy as his strength. "Ebed, how much further?" she asked, worry creeping into her voice as she felt fresh blood seeping through his bandage. "Beyond the next bend," he replied, his words barely audible above the rushing water, "where the walls open to the sky." As they rounded the curve in the canyon, Rebecca gasped. The narrow passage suddenly widened into a hidden grotto. Sunlight streamed down through an opening in the rock ceiling, illuminating a placid pool fed by a small waterfall. On the far side, a dark opening in the cliff face marked the entrance to a cave. "The sacred place," Marquis murmured. "My people have come here for generations." They had almost reached the cave when a rifle shot echoed through the grotto. Rebecca spun to see Blackton standing at the canyon entrance, his arm bandaged where Marquis's knife had struck, his face contorted with fury. "Nowhere left to run," he called, leveling his rifle. Mackay pushed Rebecca behind him, drawing himself up despite his wound. "You have followed us into sacred ground," he said, his voice carrying a power that belied his weakened state. "This place is protected by spirits you cannot understand." Blackton laughed. "Your spirits didn't help your cousin much when I put a bullet in him last winter, did they?" Something dangerous flashed in Marquis's eyes. "That was your mistake. His spirit guided me to you." The rustler advanced, splashing through the shallow edge of the pool. "Enough talk. Where's the sheriff's daughter hiding? Behind you?" As Blackton moved into the center of the grotto, something unexpected happened. The ground beneath the pool began to tremble. Small stones clattered down from the canyon walls, splashing into the water. The trembling intensified, and a deep rumbling sound rose from the earth itself. "Earthquake," Rebecca whispered, clutching Marquis's arm. The Blackfoot shook his head. "No, something else." Blackton froze, suddenly uncertain as the water around his legs began to churn. The peaceful pool transformed into a roiling cauldron as pressure built beneath the surface. Before he could retreat, a geyser erupted with explosive force, the scalding water shooting 20 feet into the air. Blackton's scream was cut short as the superheated spray engulfed him. He staggered backward, his clothing steaming, skin blistering from the heat. His rifle forgotten, he turned to flee, only to find his escape cut off by Quinn and another rustler who had followed him into the canyon. "Get back!" Blackton shouted to his confused men. "The whole place is coming apart!" The tremors increased, rocks now raining down from the canyon walls. Rebecca pulled Marquis toward the cave entrance as a boulder the size of a wagon crashed into the pool, sending waves sloshing over the edges. "Inside!" Maki urged, pushing her through the narrow opening. "We will be safe here." The darkness of the cave swallowed them just as the full fury of nature was unleashed in the grotto behind them. The last thing Rebecca saw before the entrance was partially blocked by falling rock was Blackton and his men scrambling desperately for the canyon exit, pursued by steam and scalding water. Inside, the air was cool and still, untouched by the chaos outside. A faint, phosphorescent glow emanated from lichen on the walls, providing just enough light to reveal a chamber that stretched deeper into the mountain. "What happened out there?" Rebecca asked, helping Maki to a smooth stone shelf where he could rest. "The hot springs beneath the mountain," he explained, wincing as he settled against the wall. "Sometimes they build pressure until they must release it. My people believe the spirits trigger the eruptions to protect this place from those who would defile it." Rebecca glanced toward the partially blocked entrance. "Will they come after us?" Maki shook his head. "Not today, but they will return with more men." He met her gaze steadily. "We must move deeper into the cave. There is another way out, one that leads to your father's position." As if to emphasize his words, a distant echo of gunfire reached them through the stone. The battle between Sheriff Taylor's posse and Blackton's remaining men continued somewhere above. Rebecca tore more strips from her petticoat to rebind Maki's wound before helping him to his feet. Together, they ventured deeper into the heart of the mountain, guided only by the faint glow of the lichen and Maki's unwavering sense of direction. The real journey had only just begun. The cave's interior grew colder as Rebecca and Maki ventured deeper into the mountain's heart. The phosphorescent glow of the lichen provided just enough light to navigate the twisting passageways. Water dripped from unseen heights, creating eerie echoes that seemed to follow them like ghostly footsteps. Rebecca shivered, not entirely. "From the cold. How much farther?" she whispered, helping Maki over a fallen column of stone. "Not far," he replied, though pain etched deep lines around his eyes. The wound in his side had stopped bleeding, but fever was setting in. She could feel the unnatural heat radiating from his skin. The tunnel narrowed before opening into a vast chamber where stalactites hung like stone daggers from a ceiling lost in darkness. A shallow, underground stream bisected the space, its surface reflecting the blue-green glow of the lichen. Along one wall, ancient paintings depicted bison hunts and spirit journeys, testament to generations of Blackfoot who had sought shelter. "In this sacred place, we rest here," Maki announced, sinking onto a flat stone beside the stream. "The water is good to drink." Rebecca cupped her hands, bringing the icy liquid to her parched lips. It tasted of minerals and earth, strange but not unpleasant. She helped Maki drink, then checked his bandage. The herbal poultice had turned dark, drawing infection from the wound. "Tell me about your father," Maki said suddenly, his voice echoing softly in the chamber. Rebecca looked up, surprised by the personal question. "He's a good man. Fair. Became sheriff after my mother died from fever 7 years ago. Said he needed to make the world safer for me." She managed a small smile. "He's stubborn. Won't stop until he finds us." Maki nodded. "A warrior's heart." "What about your family?" she asked cautiously. His expression grew distant. "My mother was Blackfoot, my father White, a trapper who stayed with the tribe. He died when I was young. My mother's brother raised me until the government men came and took me to their school." Bitterness crept into his voice. "They cut my hair, beat me for speaking my language, taught me to be ashamed of my mother's blood." "I'm sorry," Rebecca said softly. "When I returned 5 years later, I was a stranger to my own people. Too white for the Blackfoot, too Indian for the whites." His hand strayed to the scar on his face. "This I earned fighting those who called me a traitor." "Is that why you live alone, between two worlds?" A wry smile touched his lips. "I track games, red signs, and guide those who pay me. I will survive." He looked directly at her. "But I have not forgotten who I am, or where I come from." A distant rumble interrupted them. Not another geothermal event, but something else. Gunfire. Muffled by layers of rock, the fighting continues, Maki observed, struggling to his feet despite Rebecca's protests. "We must move. If Blackton's men secure the mountain, they will search these caves." They followed the underground stream as it wound deeper into the mountain. After what seemed like hours, the passage began to slope upward, the air growing fresher. Eventually, they reached a chamber where moonlight spilled through a narrow fissure in the ceiling. "Night has fallen," Maki said, gazing up at the stars visible through the opening. "We are on the far side of the mountain now. Your father's position is southeast, perhaps 2 miles. Rebecca nodded, determination masking her exhaustion. "Can you climb?" Before Maki could answer, voices echoed from the passage behind them. Rough, angry voices drawing nearer. Blackton's men had found their trail. "No time for climbing," Maki said grimly, scanning the chamber for options. "There." He pointed to a narrow crevice in the wall, barely visible in the shadows. "It leads to the surface. You go first. I will follow." Rebecca hesitated. "You're too weak. You'll never make it." "Go," he insisted, pressing his bow and remaining arrows into her hands. "I will delay them." "No." She stood her ground, blue eyes flashing with the same steel her father possessed. "We've come this far together. I won't leave you now." The voices grew louder. They had seconds, not minutes. "Then we make a stand," Maki decided, drawing his knife and wedging himself behind a large boulder near the chamber entrance. "When they enter, I will attack from the side. You strike from behind that column." Rebecca positioned herself as instructed, gripping Maki's bow awkwardly. She'd watched him use it, but had never drawn a bowstring herself. The weight was unfamiliar, the tension greater than she'd expected. Flickering torchlight spilled into the chamber as the first rustler appeared. Quinn, his face haggard and smeared with grime. Behind him followed another man Rebecca didn't recognize, both with pistols drawn. "Spread out," Quinn ordered. "They're in here somewhere." The men advanced cautiously, boots crunching on loose stones. When Quinn passed Maki's position, the Blackfoot lunged, catching him in a chokehold and pressing his knife to the rustler's throat. "Drop your weapon," he commanded the second man, using Quinn as a shield. Instead of complying, the rustler swung his pistol toward Maki. Rebecca stepped from her hiding place and lost an arrow. Her aim was wild. The arrow clattered harmlessly against the wall, but the distraction was enough. Quinn drove his elbow back into Maki's wounded side, breaking free as the Blackfoot doubled over in pain. "Kill them both," Quinn ordered, retrieving his fallen pistol. What happened next stunned everyone in the chamber. A third figure emerged from the passage. Blackton himself, his face and hands blistered from the geyser's scalding water, clothes still damp and steaming in the cool cave air. "Hold," he commanded, his voice raw. "We need them alive." Quinn turned, eyes widening at his boss's grisly appearance. "Jesus, Silas, you look half-cooked." Blackton ignored the comment, advancing into the chamber with his rifle aimed at Rebecca. "Montgomery's dead," he announced flatly. "Shot by the marshal in Helena this morning. His man spilled everything before they hanged him." The news hung in the air between them, its implications clear. Without Montgomery's protection and payoffs, the rustlers were exposed. "What's that mean for us?" Quinn asked, pistol still trained on Maki. "It means we need insurance," Blackton replied. "The sheriff's daughter buys us safe passage out of the territory." Rebecca backed away. An arrow knocked, but her hands trembled too badly to aim effectively. "My father won't negotiate with murderers." "He will for you," Blackton countered, stepping closer. "And the Blackfoot comes too. The army's offering a reward for him. Seems they think he's behind some raids north of here." Maki straightened despite his pain. "I have raided no settlements." "Army don't care," Blackton sneered. "They just want an Indian to blame." A standoff ensued, tension crackling between them like static electricity. Then, unexpectedly, Quinn lowered his pistol. "No," he said quietly. Blackton turned, disbelief etched across his blistered features. "What did you say?" "I said no." Quinn's voice grew firmer. "It's over, Silas. Montgomery's dead. The game's finished." "Since when did you grow a conscience?" Blackton demanded, his rifle now swinging toward his lieutenant. "Since I watched you murder Jasper," Quinn replied evenly. "Since I realized we're just pawns being sacrificed while men like Montgomery count their money." The third rustler shifted uncomfortably. "Quinn's right, Silas. We're wanted men now. No place to run." Blackton's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You yellow-bellied cowards. After everything we've done, you're just giving up?" In the momentary distraction, Rebecca caught Maki's eye. He nodded almost imperceptibly toward the crevice he'd pointed out earlier. While the rustlers argued, they began inching toward it. "We're dead anyway if we try to use her as a hostage," Quinn argued. "Taylor will hunt us to the ends of the earth." "Then we kill them all," Blackton snarled, raising his rifle. "Starting with you." The shot exploded in the confined space, deafening in its intensity. Quinn staggered backward, clutching his chest as blood blossomed across his shirt. He looked down in surprise, then crumpled to the cave floor. Rebecca seized the moment of shock, drawing the bowstring and loosing an arrow at Blackton. This time, her aim was true. The arrow struck his shoulder, spinning him around with the force of impact. His rifle discharged into the ceiling, bringing down a shower of stone and dust. "The crevice!" Maki shouted, shoving her toward the narrow opening. "Now!" She scrambled into the tight passage, feeling a sharp stone scrape against her skin. Behind her, Maki squeezed in just as the remaining rustler fired wildly into the darkness. The crevice twisted upward, so narrow in places that they had to turn sideways to progress. Rebecca could hear Blackton's enraged shouts echoing below, growing fainter as they climbed higher. After several agonizing minutes, the passage widened slightly, allowing them to move more freely. "Almost there," Maki gasped, his strength fading with each step. "I can smell the night air." The crevice ended abruptly at a small opening partially covered by juniper bushes. They emerged onto a steep hillside under a canopy of stars, the cool night air a blessing after the stifling confines of the cave. In the valley below, pinpricks of light revealed a camp, torches, and campfires. "Your father's men," Maki said, slumping against a boulder. "Go to them." Rebecca shook her head, tearing yet another strip from her tattered petticoat to bind his freshly bleeding wound. "We go together." The night wind carried the distant sound of horses approaching from the west, reinforcements perhaps from town. The tide was turning in their favor, but they weren't safe yet. Blackton was still alive, and now he had nothing left to lose. Dawn would bring a final reckoning. The mountainside offered little cover, scattered junipers and boulders against an expanse of loose shale that would betray their movement with noise and sliding rocks. Rebecca surveyed the terrain, calculating the safest path down to her father's camp in the valley below. Beside her, Maki leaned heavily against a pine trunk, his breathing labored. "We need to move before Blackton emerges," she whispered, slinging the bow across her back. Only 2 arrows remained in the quiver. Precious little, if they encountered resistance. Maki nodded weakly. "Follow the game trail," he suggested, pointing to a barely visible path winding down the slope. "Animals find the safest way." They set off slowly, Rebecca supporting Maki's weight as they navigated the treacherous descent. The night had grown colder, their breath forming small clouds in the mountain air. Stars blazed overhead in a moonless sky, offering just enough light to see the path immediately before them. Behind and above, a shout echoed. Blackton and his remaining man had found the cave exit. Rebecca urged Maki to move faster, though every step clearly caused him pain. The arrow wound had taken its toll. Fever burned through him now, his skin hot to the touch, despite the chill. "Leave me," he murmured as they paused behind a large boulder. "I slow you down." "Not happening," she replied firmly, adjusting his arm across her shoulders. "My father taught me we don't abandon those who risk their lives for us." A rifle shot cracked through the night air, the bullet striking stone nearby, sending fragments flying. Rebecca pulled Maki down as a second shot followed, closer this time. "They've spotted us," she hissed, peering around the boulder's edge. In the faint starlight, she could make out two figures picking their way down the slope, using the same game trail they had followed. "We need to split up," Maki said, surprising her with sudden clarity despite his fever. "I will draw them away. You reach your father." "That's suicide," Rebecca protested. "No." He reached into his leather pouch, extracting a small object that gleamed dully in the starlight, a silver whistle on a leather cord. "This calls to mountain lions. The sound carries for miles." He pressed it into her hand. 3 short blasts. "Your father's men will hear. They will come." Another shot rang, out closer still. They had no more time to argue. Rebecca took the whistle, then helped Maki to his feet. "Head straight down," he instructed, pointing toward the valley. "I go east, along the ridge. When you are safe, signal." Before she could object further, Maki slipped away, moving with unexpected speed for a wounded man, using the darkness and terrain to his advantage. Rebecca watched him go, then turned in the opposite direction, picking her way carefully downslope. She had covered perhaps 100 yards when shouts indicated Blackton had spotted Maki. Gunfire followed, the shots echoing across the mountainside. Rebecca forced herself to keep moving, though every instinct screamed to go back and help. Maki had given her a chance, she couldn't waste it. The game trail descended into a belt of dense pines that offered better cover but made navigation more difficult. Branches whipped at her face, roots threatened to trip her feet. Still she pressed on, guided by the distant firelight of her father's camp. Above and behind her, the pursuit continued. More shots, more shouts, then a scream, not Maki's voice, but another man. Had he somehow turned the tables on one of his pursuers? Rebecca couldn't be sure, but hope flickered briefly. The forest floor began to level out as she reached the mountain's base. Through the trees ahead, torchlight flickered, the outer sentries of her father's camp. So close now. She quickened her pace, her legs burning with exhaustion. A twig snapped behind her. Rebecca spun, knocking one of her remaining arrows in a single fluid motion, a skill she'd somehow absorbed from watching Maki. "Don't move," growled a familiar voice as Blackton emerged from the shadows, rifle leveled at her chest. Blood darkened one sleeve where her arrow had struck him earlier, and angry red blisters covered half his face from the geyser's scalding. "Touch. Drop the bow." Rebecca held steady, the arrowhead aimed at his heart. "Where's Maki?" A cruel smile twisted Blackton's blistered features. "Your Indian friend took a tumble down a ravine. Doubt he's breathing any more." He adjusted his grip on the rifle. "Now drop the bow or I drop you." "You'll shoot me anyway," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "That's all you know. Killing." "True enough," Blackton conceded, taking a step closer. "But I'm offering you a choice in how it happens, quick and clean or slow and painful." Rebecca's arms began to tremble from the strain of holding the bowstring taut. She wouldn't be able to maintain the position much longer, and Blackton knew it. His finger tightened on the trigger. A whistle pierced the night, not the silver whistle Maki had given her, but a man's whistle, followed by rustling from the bushes to her right. "Rebecca," called a familiar voice. Deputy Finch stepped into view, his rifle raised. "Rebecca, is that you?" Blackton swung his weapon toward the new threat. In that split second of distraction, Rebecca loosed her arrow. It struck Blackton in the chest with enough force to stagger him backward. His rifle discharged harmlessly into the air as he dropped to one knee, looking down in shock at the shaft protruding from his body. "You He gasped, struggling to raise his weapon again. Finch fired, the shot catching Blackton squarely in the shoulder, spinning him around. He collapsed face first onto the forest floor. Rebecca, the young deputy, rushed forward, his face a mixture of relief and disbelief. Thank God. Are you hurt? We've been searching everywhere. She lowered the bow, suddenly overcome with exhaustion. Charlie, we need to find Marquis. He's wounded, somewhere on the eastern slope. Finch helped steady her. Your father's organizing? Search parties right now. We heard gunfire and we're coming to investigate. The silver whistle, Rebecca remembered suddenly, pulling it from her pocket. Marquis said to blow 3 short blasts. It would bring help. The deputy looked skeptical but nodded. Try it. Rebecca raised the whistle to her lips and blew 3 times, the high, keening sound echoing across the mountainside. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then, from somewhere far above, an answering call came. Not a whistle, but a long, low howl that raised the hair on the back of her neck. "What in God's name was that?" Finch whispered, his rifle raised toward the darkness. "Help," Rebecca said simply. Within minutes, they were surrounded by her father's men, led by Sheriff Taylor himself. The reunion was brief but emotional, a tight embrace, eyes shining with unshed tears, before Taylor's professional demeanor reasserted itself. "Blackton?" he asked, noting the body on the ground. "Dead or near to it," Finch reported. "Rebecca got him with an arrow before I put a bullet in him." Taylor's eyebrows rose as he glanced at the bow, still clutched in his daughter's hands. "Seems you've learned some new skills." His expression grew serious. "What about the Blackfoot tracker? My men said he was with you." Rebecca quickly explained about Maki's injury and sacrifice, pointing toward the eastern slope where she'd last seen him. "He's badly wounded, Pa. We need to find him before it's too late." Taylor nodded, turning to organize search parties. As men with torches spread out to begin combing the mountainside, a commotion arose from the perimeter of the camp. "Sheriff!" called a rancher, his voice tinged with alarm. "You better come see this." They hurried toward the disturbance to find an astonishing sight. From the darkness of the forest emerged 3 mounted Blackfoot warriors, their faces painted for battle. Between them, supported on a makeshift travois pulled by a 4th horse, lay Marquis, unconscious but alive. The lead warrior, a tall man with a single eagle feather in his braided hair, raised an empty hand in greeting. "We heard the call," he said in accented English, gesturing toward the silver whistle still hanging from Rebecca's hand. "The medicine whistle. It has not been used in many seasons." Sheriff Taylor stepped forward cautiously. "You know this man?" he asked, indicating Marquis. The warrior nodded. "He is 2 Rivers, son of my sister. He has walked between your world and ours." His gaze shifted to Rebecca. "You used his whistle. You are under his protection." Rebecca moved to the travois, kneeling beside Marquis' still form. His breathing was shallow but steady, fresh bandages wrapped around his torso. The Blackfoot had already treated his wound with their medicine. "He needs a doctor," she insisted, looking up at the warriors. The lead warrior studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "We will bring him to your healer, but we will stay with him." Sheriff Taylor stepped forward, hand extended in a gesture of peace. "Your people are welcome in my town. I give you my word as the law in these parts." As the unlikely allies moved toward the main camp, Marquis stirred, his eyes opening briefly. He found Rebecca's gaze, a question in his expression. "Blackton's finished," she assured him. "It's over." A ghost of a smile touched his lips before he slipped back into unconsciousness. Rebecca walked beside the travois, one hand resting lightly on Marquis' arm as they descended into the valley. But their journey was far from over. Dawn broke over Rimrock Springs, painting the weathered buildings in soft gold light. After 3 days of tension and violence, an unusual calm settled over the town. Outside the doctor's small house, Blackfoot warriors maintained a silent vigil, their presence drawing curious stares from townsfolk unaccustomed to seeing Indians. Within the settlement's boundaries, inside, Dr. Wilson carefully changed the bandages on Mahki's wound. The bullet had been successfully removed the previous evening in a delicate operation that had lasted 2 hours. Now the physician's weathered face showed cautious optimism. "The fever's breaking," he announced to Rebecca, who hadn't left Mahki's side since their return. "Your Blackfoot friend is remarkably strong. Most men would have died from such a wound and the journey back." "He's not just strong," Rebecca said quietly, wringing out a cloth in cool water and placing it on Mahki's forehead. "He's stubborn," the doctor chuckled. "Reminds me of someone else I know." He patted her shoulder before gathering his instruments. "Call me if there's any change. I need to check on Thompson at the saloon." Left alone with Mahki, Rebecca settled into the chair beside his bed. Exhaustion weighed on her. She'd barely slept since their ordeal began. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Blackton's face, felt the tension of the bowstring against her fingers, and heard the terrible sound of the arrow striking flesh. She had killed a man. The reality of it sat like a stone in her stomach. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Her father entered, carrying a tray with coffee and fresh bread. "Thought you might need this," Sheriff Taylor said, setting the tray on the bedside table. His eyes studied his daughter with a mixture of pride and concern. "Martha says you haven't eaten since yesterday." Rebecca accepted the coffee gratefully. "I'm not hungry." Taylor pulled up a chair beside her. For a long moment, he simply sat in companionable silence, listening to Mahki's steady breathing. "The Army patrol arrived an hour ago," he finally said. "Captain Reynolds wants a full statement about Montgomery's involvement with the Rustlers." Rebecca nodded absently. "What about the remaining gang members?" "2 survived. They've confessed everything, the land scheme, the murders, all of it." Taylor hesitated. "They confirmed what Blackton said about Montgomery's death. The territorial marshal caught him trying to flee to Canada with forged documents and a fortune in cash." "Justice," Rebecca murmured. Her father's expression softened. "You did what you had to, Rebecca. Blackton wouldn't have stopped until everyone who knew about the scheme was silenced." She met his gaze, her blue eyes troubled. "It isn't just that, Pa. Everything's different now." "I'm different." Taylor reached out, covering her hand with his. "That happens when we face death. We see what matters clearly for the first time." From the bed came a soft groan. Mahki's eyes fluttered open, focusing slowly on the room around him. "Water," he whispered. Rebecca quickly held a cup to his lips, supporting his head as he drank. "The doctor removed the bullet. You're going to be all right." Mahki's gaze moved to Sheriff Taylor. "The warriors are outside," Taylor assured him. "Your uncle, Hunting Hawk, has been speaking with Captain Reynolds. The army won't be pressing any charges against your people for the raids north of here. There's evidence it was Blackton's gang trying to frame Blackfoot." Relief flickered across Mahki's face before pain drew his features tight again. Rebecca adjusted his pillows, her movements gentle and practiced. "I'll let you rest," Taylor said, rising. At the door he paused. "Mahki, 2 Rivers, whatever name you prefer. The town owes you a debt. I owe you a debt I can never repay." After her father departed, Rebecca returned to her chair. Mahki watched her through half-closed eyes. "You have not slept," he observed. "Someone needed to watch over you," she replied with a small smile. "The nightmares?" he asked softly. Rebecca looked up, startled by his perception. "How did you know?" "I have killed men," he said simply. "I know the shadow it casts on the spirit." She turned away, blinking back unexpected tears. "Does it ever fade? The feeling that you've crossed a line you can't uncross?" "Not fade," Mahki replied thoughtfully. "Transform, like a bear climbing a mountain. Each step changes what he sees, how he understands the valley below. The metaphor hung between them as Rebecca considered his words. "I keep wondering if there is another way." "There is always another path," he acknowledged, "but we walk the one before us with the courage we have in that moment." His hand moved to cover hers. "You chose survival. There is no shame in that." Outside the window, voices rose, not in anger, but in curiosity. Rebecca peered through the glass to see the Blackfoot warriors conversing with a group of townspeople. To her surprise, Martha from the general store was showing them fabric while gesturing animatedly. One of the younger warriors seemed particularly interested, pointing to a blue material that matched the color of the sky. "They're trading," she said with wonder. Maki struggled to sit up, wincing with the effort. Rebecca helped him adjust his position to see through the window. "Hunting Hawk believes peace comes through understanding," he explained. "Trade opens doors between people." For several minutes they silently observed the unexpected commerce taking place. Then Maki turned to Rebecca, his expression serious. "I must tell you something," he said, "about who I truly am." Rebecca settled back in her chair, giving him her full attention. "I was not always a solitary tracker," he began. "After returning from the white man's school, I tried to rejoin my mother's people, but I had changed too much. My thoughts, my words, even the way I walked, all marked me as different." He touched the scar on his face. "This I received, defending a white family from warriors who sought revenge for broken treaties. My own cousin struck me with his knife, calling me a traitor to our blood." Rebecca listened intently, understanding. "Now why he lived between worlds. I left the village, wandering for 2 winters before finding work with ranchers who cared only that I could track and hunt. I built a small cabin near Harrison's ranch and lived alone." His voice lowered. "Until last winter, when Blackton's gang raided a Blackfoot hunting party. My cousin, the same who had scared me, was among those killed." "That's why you tracked Blackton," Rebecca realized. "Not just for the rancher's reward," Maki nodded. "Blood calls for blood, but vengeance is a poison that spreads." He met her gaze steadily. "When I saw Blackton take you, I recognized a chance to right a wrong differently. Not through death, but through life." "And now?" she asked softly. "What happens now that it's over?" A complexity of emotions crossed his features. "I do not know. The tribe would accept me back, now that I have proven my loyalty. Your father has offered me work as a deputy." His eyes held a question. "What would you choose, if the choice were yours?" The directness of his query caught Rebecca off guard. Heat rose in her cheeks as she considered her answer. "I would choose neither," she said finally. "I would choose a path where you didn't have to be only Blackfoot or only white, where you could be Maki 2 Rivers, a man of both worlds." A smile touched his lips, the first true smile she had seen from him. "Wisdom from the sheriff's daughter." Rebecca returned his smile, conscious of his hand still covering hers, of the current of understanding flowing between them. Outside, the trading continued. Inside, 2 people from different worlds found common ground in the quiet aftermath of survival. The sound of horses approaching broke the moment. Rebecca glanced out the window to see Captain Reynolds and several soldiers riding toward the doctor's house, her father and Deputy Finch following close behind. "The army wants statements," she sighed. "More questions." Makai's expression grew serious again. "The truth must be told. About Montgomery, about Blackton, about all of it." Rebecca nodded, standing to meet the approaching officials. "Together, then?" "Together," he agreed, his eyes never leaving hers. The path ahead remained uncertain, but for the first time since her ordeal began, Rebecca faced the future without fear. 1 week has passed. Rimrock Springs gradually returned to its normal rhythm, though change lingered in the air like the scent of distant rain. The Blackfoot warriors had departed after 3 days, but not before establishing tentative trade agreements with several merchants. Sheriff Taylor had wired the territorial governor with a full account of Montgomery's scheme, prompting investigations into similar land grabs throughout the region. In the small room behind Dr. Wilson's office, Markey stood unassisted for the first time since the bullet's removal. His recovery had progressed remarkably, fueled by a combination of the doctor's care and traditional Blackfoot remedies brought by Hunting Hawk. Now he carefully pulled a clean shirt over his bandaged torso, preparing to face the day ahead. Rebecca entered carrying a bundle of clothes, his buckskin jacket cleaned and mended, his moccasins restored with new beadwork by the women of his tribe. "The doctor says you can leave today," she said, setting the items on the bed, "though he insists you shouldn't ride for at least another week." Markey nodded, accepting the doctor's verdict without complaint. "Your father has arranged lodging at the boarding house." An awkward silence fell between them, the first since their ordeal. In the safe confines of the sick room, they had spoken freely about their experiences, about her nightmares, about his life between worlds. Now, with his recovery, uncertainty crept back in. "I should let you finish dressing," Rebecca said, turning to leave. "Rebecca!" Her name on his lips stopped her at the door. "Thank you." She smiled, understanding all that remained unspoken in those simple words. "I'll wait outside." The door had barely closed behind her when Deputy Finch burst into the front office, his young face flushed with exertion. "Rebecca," he called, spotting her in the hallway. "Where's your father?" "At the office, I think." "What's wrong, Charlie?" Finch glanced nervously at the door to McKee's room. "Riders coming. Army patrol from Fort Shaw, but they're not alone. They've got Ben Wilson in custody." Rebecca's blood ran cold. Ben Wilson had been one of Blackton's men, the youngest of the gang, barely 20 and new to their operation. He'd escaped during the mountain confrontation, disappearing into the wilderness while the others fought. "What does he want?" "He's made a deal," Finch explained hurriedly. "Testimony against Montgomery's remaining associates in exchange for leniency." He lowered his voice. "But that's not all. He's claiming Markey was secretly working with Blackton all along, says the whole rescue was staged to throw suspicion off him." "That's absurd!" Rebecca exclaimed. "Markey nearly died saving me." Finch nodded in agreement. "Your father knows that. I know that. But Captain Reynolds has orders from his superiors. They want the Blackfoot tracker brought in for questioning. The door opened behind them, and Markey stepped out, fully dressed. His expression revealed nothing, but Rebecca knew he had overheard everything. "We need to find Pa," she insisted, turning to Finch. "How long before they reach town?" 20 minutes, maybe less." Markey's hand touched her arm gently. "This was inevitable," he said quietly. "The army has always needed someone to blame." "I won't let them take you," Rebecca stated firmly. "Not after everything you've done. Taking a stand against the army would only bring trouble to your father and this town," Markey reasoned. "I will go with them, answer their questions. The truth will speak for itself." Rebecca shook her head, determination hardening her features. "The truth didn't matter when they took you from your mother. Why would it matter now?" Before Markey could respond, Sheriff Taylor appeared at the office door, his grave. "I just heard. Ben Wilson's spinning quite a tale." "It's a lie, Pa," Rebecca insisted. "All of it." "I know that," Taylor assured her, "but Reynolds is under pressure. The territorial governor wants this whole mess cleaned up quickly, with clear villains and heroes." He looked at Markey. "Unfortunately, it's always easier to blame an Indian than admit white men like Montgomery orchestrated everything." "What can we do?" Finch asked, nervously adjusting his badge. Taylor thought for a moment. "Charlie, ride to Collins' place. They saw Blackton's men days before Rebecca was taken. Their testimony could help." He turned to his daughter. "Get Martha and anyone else who's had dealings with Markey over the years. We need character witnesses." Commotion arose from the street. horses and wagons pulling aside as riders approached. Through the window, they could see dust rising at the town's edge. "No time," Maki said calmly. "They are already here." The small group moved to the front porch of the doctor's office as 6 army soldiers rode into town, flanking a wagon where a shackled Ben Wilson sat beside Captain Reynolds. The young rustler's face was gaunt, but his eyes gleamed with a calculating light as he spotted Maki. The soldiers formed a perimeter as Reynolds dismounted, approaching Sheriff Taylor with military stiffness. "Sheriff," he greeted formally. "I have orders to take the Blackfoot tracker known as Maki into custody for questioning regarding his association with the Blackton gang." Taylor stepped forward, positioning himself subtly between Reynolds and Maki. "On what evidence, Captain?" Reynolds gestured toward Wilson. "This man has provided sworn testimony that the tracker was Blackton's scout for over a year, helping identify vulnerable ranches and homesteads." "That's a damn lie," Rebecca interjected, her voice carrying across the now silent street. Townspeople had begun to gather, drawn by the confrontation. "Miss Taylor," Reynolds acknowledged her with cool professionalism, "your recent ordeal makes your emotional response understandable, but this isn't emotion. It's fact," she interrupted. "Maki saved my life. He was shot protecting me." Wilson leaned forward in the wagon. "That's what Blackton wanted you to think, miss. It was all part of their plan. The Indian was supposed to gain your trust, learn what your pa knew about Montgomery's business." Murmurs rippled through the growing crowd. Despite everything Maki had done, suspicion came easily to people who had grown up fearing Indian attacks. "If that's true," Taylor challenged, "then why did Blackton try to kill him multiple times?" "I saw it with my own eyes," Wilson shrugged. "Falling out among thieves. The Indian wanted a bigger cut." Reynolds signaled to his men. "Sheriff, I respect your position, but my orders come directly from Fort Shaw. The tracker will be taken there for formal questioning." 2 soldiers dismounted, moving toward Maki. Rebecca stepped in their path, her hand instinctively reaching for the weapon she no longer carried. "Rebecca," Maki said quietly, "let them take me. Fighting will only bring more suffering." "Listen to him, miss," Reynolds advised. "Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be." The tension in the street was palpable as more townspeople gathered. Martha from the general store pushed to the front, her normally gentle face flushed with anger. "This man has traded fairly with us for years," she called out. "He found the Hudson children when they got lost in that blizzard 2 winters back. Carried little Amy 3 miles through snow up to his waist." Others joined in, voices rising in Maki's defense. "He tracked the wolves that were killing Peterson's sheep. Brought medicine during the fever outbreak when the doctor couldn't make it through." Reynolds raised a hand for silence. "Your sentiments are noted, but my orders stand." As the soldiers moved forward again, an unexpected interruption came from the edge of town. Hoofbeats pounded on the packed earth as a dozen riders approached at speed. Hunting Hawk and his Blackfoot warriors, accompanied by a white man in the formal uniform of a federal marshal. The soldiers instinctively reached for their weapons, but Reynolds held them in check with a sharp command. The newcomers reined in their horses, dust swirling around them. As the marshal dismounted and approached, "Captain Reynolds," he called, his voice carrying authority. "Marshal James Harrington, I believe you're about to make a serious mistake." Reynolds stiffened. "I have my orders, Marshal." "And I have these," Harrington replied, producing a leather folio containing official documents. Signed statements from the surviving members of Blackton's gang, confessing to all charges and explicitly clearing 2 rivers of any involvement. Wilson paled visibly in the wagon. "They're lying to save the Indian." Harrington fixed him with a cold stare. These confessions were given separately with no knowledge of each other's statements. "All match perfectly." He handed the papers to Reynolds. "Additionally, I have a telegram from the governor countermanding your orders." Two Rivers is to be released into my custody immediately." As Reynolds reviewed the documents, Hunting Hawk approached Maki, speaking quietly in their native tongue. The Blackfoot elder's weathered face showed both concern and pride as he gazed at his sister's son. Reynolds finally looked up, his expression a mixture of frustration and relief. "It seems I've been operating on incomplete information," he admitted, returning the papers to Harrington. "My apologies, Sheriff Taylor." He turned to Maki with grudging respect. "And to you, Two Rivers." The soldiers withdrew, taking the protesting Wilson with them. As they departed, Marshal Harrington approached Taylor and Marquis. "The governor sends his personal thanks for exposing Montgomery's operation," he said. "The land deals have been invalidated, and the railroad will negotiate fairly with all property owners." Rebecca moved to Marquis' side, relief evident in her face. "It's truly over now." "Not quite," Hunting Hawk interjected, his dark eyes fixed on his nephew. "Two Rivers must now make his choice." All eyes turned to Maki, standing tall, despite his recent wound, a man poised between two worlds. His decision would change everything. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Rimrock Springs as the town collectively held its breath. Maki stood at the center of attention, the weight of his impending decision visible in the set of his shoulders. Before him stood Hunting Hawk, representing the path back to his mother's people. Behind him, Sheriff Taylor and Rebecca offered a different future, one in the world of settlers where he had lived as an outsider for so long. "The council has spoken," Hunting Hawk said in English, ensuring everyone understood the significance of his words. "The ban is lifted. You may return to your people with honor, Two Rivers." Murmurs rippled through the gathered crowd. Everyone knew what this meant: reinstatement to the tribe that had once rejected him, recognition of his courage, the chance to reclaim his heritage. Maki inclined his head respectfully to his uncle. "This is a great honor. You have proven your heart remains true to your blood," the elder continued. "Your mother's spirit would be proud." Rebecca watched silently, her expression carefully composed despite the turmoil within. After everything they had endured together, the thought of Maki leaving created an unexpected hollow feeling in her chest. Yet she knew better than anyone what this opportunity meant to him, a chance to heal the deepest wound he carried. Sheriff Taylor stepped forward, his weathered face solemn. "Two Rivers, Rimrock Springs owes you a debt we can never fully repay." He extended his hand, offering something that glinted in the sunlight, a deputy's badge. "But if you choose to stay, there's a place for you here. Not as an outsider, but as a respected member of this community." The stark choice hung in the air between them, two worlds that had never successfully merged, now both opening their doors to a man who had never fully belonged to either. Maki looked from the badge to his uncle, then to Rebecca, whose blue eyes met steadily across the distance between them. "All my life," he began, his deep voice carrying across the hushed gathering, "I have walked the boundary between two peoples. At the white man's school, I was beaten for remembering my mother's songs. In my tribe's village, I was mistrusted for speaking the white man's words." He touched the scar on his face, a physical reminder of rejection. "I believed this marked me as belonging nowhere. Now I see it differently." Maki moved toward Hunting Hawk, speaking with deep respect. "Uncle, tell our people I am honored by their acceptance. The blood of our ancestors flows in my veins, and I will never forget the wisdom they have passed down." The elder nodded, understanding beginning to dawn in his eyes. Maki then turned to Sheriff Taylor. "And to you, Sheriff, I say thank you for seeing beyond the color of my skin to the actions of my hands." He did not reach for the badge, however. Instead, he looked beyond both men to the horizon where the plains met the mountains in the distance. "I cannot choose between my two halves. To deny either would be to deny myself." His gaze returned to those gathered around him. Perhaps the Creator made me this way for a purpose, to stand in both worlds, to help build understanding where there has been fear. Hunting Hawk studied his nephew with new perception. What do you propose, Two Rivers? I will build my cabin at Elk Crossing, Maki answered, referring to a location halfway between Rimrock Springs and the Blackfoot hunting grounds. From there, I can serve both peoples as guide, as translator, as mediator when troubles arise. He looked at Sheriff Taylor. I will help your law when needed, but I cannot wear your badge. The sheriff nodded slowly, respect evident in his expression as he pocketed the star. Fair enough. The door remains open. Rebecca stepped forward, unable to remain silent any longer. You'll be alone again. Maki turned to her, something warming in his usually guarded expression. The life of a boundary walker is often solitary, he acknowledged. But perhaps it need not always be so. The meaning behind his words wasn't lost on anyone present, least of all Sheriff Taylor, whose eyebrows rose slightly before his face settled into thoughtful lines. Elk Crossing is only half a day's ride, Rebecca observed, a slight flush coloring her cheeks. A distance that can be traveled in either direction, Maki replied. Hunting Hawk surprised everyone by chuckling softly. My sister always said you were stubborn, like the mountain stands against the wind. He clasped Maki's shoulder. Your path is your own to make. The tribe will trade with Rimrock Springs through you. Perhaps something new can grow from the blood-soaked ground of our past. Marshal Harrington, who had observed the exchange with interest, stepped forward. The governor will be pleased to hear this. He's authorized me to appoint a territory liaison to the Blackfoot, someone trusted by both sides. He extended his hand to Maki. The position comes with federal recognition and authority to negotiate on behalf of both parties. Maki hesitated only briefly before accepting the handshake. I will serve truth, not politics. Wouldn't expect anything less, Harrington replied with a wry smile. As the gathering began to disperse, plans were made. The Blackfoot would camp outside town for 2 more days, establishing initial trade agreements. Meki would travel to the territorial capital with Harrington to formalize his new position before returning to select the site for his cabin at Elk Crossing. That evening, as twilight painted the western sky in bands of gold and crimson, Rebecca found Maki sitting alone on the doctor's porch, gazing toward the distant mountains. May I join you? She asked, her voice carrying the slightest hint of uncertainty. He nodded, making room on the bench beside him. For several minutes they sat in comfortable silence as the first stars appeared overhead. Will you be happy there? She finally asked. Between two worlds? Maki considered her question carefully. Happy is not a word my people use often. We speak instead of living in harmony or walking in balance with the world around us. He turned to face her. I believe I can find that balance at Elk Crossing. Rebecca nodded, understanding. You've chosen a difficult path. No more difficult than yours, he observed. The sheriff's daughter, who defied rustlers and fired arrows to save Blackfoot's life. A rare smile touched his lips. Your father tells me the townswomen are scandalized. She laughed softly. Martha says I've ruined my chances of finding a proper husband. And what does Rebecca Taylor say? He asked, his voice deepening slightly. She met his gaze directly, the same courage that had carried her through their ordeal now evident in her steady blue eyes. She says proper is highly overrated. The distance between them seemed suddenly smaller, charged with unspoken possibility. Around them, Rimrock Springs settled into evening routines, lamps being lit in windows, the saloon piano striking up a lively tune, children being called in for supper. Life continued, but somehow irrevocably changed. 3 weeks later, a small gathering assembled at Elk Crossing, where the clear waters of Thompson Creek met the broader flow of the Rimrock River. A simple cabin of pine logs stood newly completed, on a gentle rise overlooking both waterways. Behind it rose the mountains, before it spread the plains, the perfect embodiment of Marquis's dual heritage. Sheriff Taylor drove the final nail into the porch step, then stepped back to admire the collective handiwork. Beside him, Deputy Finch, the Collins family, Martha, and several other townspeople stood alongside 3 Blackfoot hunters who had contributed elk hides for the cabin's interior. Hunting Hawk performed a brief blessing ceremony, burning sage and sweetgrass, while offering prayers in his native tongue. When he finished, he presented Maki with a painted shield bearing the symbols of both mountain and plain, the mark of a boundary walker. As the visitors began their journeys home, Rebecca lingered behind, her horse tethered nearby. She and Maki stood together on the newly built porch, watching the 2 groups depart in opposite directions. A new beginning, she observed, her hand finding his between them. Maki nodded, his fingers gently interlacing with hers. For all of us. Before them stretched a future neither could have imagined days earlier, uncertain and challenging, but filled with possibility. The boundary between their worlds remained, but it had transformed from a barrier into a meeting place where understanding might finally take root and grow. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting their shadows long across the ground, they stood together, not as sheriff's daughter and Blackfoot warrior, but as 2 people who had journeyed through fire and emerged. Transformed, the path ahead was theirs to make. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.